Okay, everybody. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's Katie, and welcome to today's GFAN call. I've got the agenda up on screen for you, but I'm going to stop sharing it now because I need to get the Global Fund One sort of set up as Diane Stewart has joined us to give us an update on the replenishment campaign, which is what we will begin with this morning, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. For me, it's morning, in case you can't tell. And then I will give a short debrief from the GFAN strategy meeting, which took place last week in a hybrid format. For those of us who were able to join in person, it was in Berlin, Germany. And then just a quick look ahead to key actions and invite any of you for the time that we have for any other announcements or sharing of information that you would like to do. So I am just going to stop sharing this and I'm going to pass it along to Diane, and I'm going to get your PowerPoint up and hope to goodness that I have done this right. I think I have. So Diane, over to you. And I don't know if you need an introduction to this group, but in case you do, you're the head of donor advocacy, donor relations at the Global Fund Secretariat and the knower of all things when it comes to replenishment. And it looks like you're joining us from a car today, which is exciting, and hoping that you don't have to drive while you're speaking with us. So welcome. And Diane, I pass it over to you, and I will have the presentation up in just a second here. Diane, over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks and hello everybody. And yes, indeed, I decided that it was safer to stop and do this presentation rather than trying to get back to the to my office for the presentation. So Katie, I'm going to move, if you could put it on full screen, I'm going to move pretty quickly compared to last time. But just to say to everybody, delighted to be here and to brief you on all of these things. I think one of the things that we discovered in the GFAN meeting last week was just how quickly things can change, and I think part of the takeaway that I had was that actually we have to really start speaking to each other on a very regular basis, because the situation in all of the donor environments is changing almost on a daily basis. So a very volatile climate. I'll quickly take you through some of what we see as the key volatilities that we're dealing with in this campaign that we didn't really experience previously, although I'm sure some of the people who tried to raise money in the wake of 2008 must have had similar challenges. First slide, please, Katie. Many of you know that we're experiencing, next slide, please, a very volatile international economic environment. The IMF put out a rather sobering world outlook at the spring meetings in April, and some of you may have seen that the World Bank and David Malpass have been in the press in the last 48 hours talking about the current inflation rates and what the impacts are. I think the headline, and you can go into these next set of slides yourselves in some detail, but the headline here is really to say that although all the countries in the world are experiencing some form of inflation or knock-on effects from the economic downturns over the last few years because of COVID, all of the predictions show that wealthier countries are bouncing back much faster, and that the real impact is going to be felt primarily in the poorest countries in the world and in developing countries. So next slide, please, Katie. And so the challenge we have is convincing donors who are facing some really challenging situations in their own national environments and in their own countries to continue to give to development assistance, because in fact, whatever challenges are being faced in the richest countries in the world, it is much, much worse in the poorer countries. And what we're seeing is that the ODA landscape itself is changing, and we're seeing a lot of diversion of ODA resources to immediate sort of humanitarian and other kinds of challenges. And we're also seeing shrinking ODA space in some of the countries where we work. Next slide, please. I think one of the challenges that we have right now at this point in the campaign, we're zeroing in on 100 days until we need to deliver on the 18 billion, and we should be making a lot of noise. But because of the terrible situation in Ukraine, with the war there, and the resulting refugee crisis and the knock-on impact for things like food security for some of the poorest countries in the world, it's really hard for us to get attention on infectious diseases. You'd think after 2 years of COVID that this wouldn't be a problem, that actually pandemics would be right at the top of the global health agenda. And in some ways they are. You know, we are leaning into a lot of those discussions on pandemic response and preparedness, and the need to make sure that AIDS, TB, and malaria are not forgotten in that fight. But there are a lot of other issues on the table. And when we were planning for this replenishment a year ago, we thought the key issues would be COVID and climate. We did not anticipate that global food security and national security would be an issue. Next slide, please. In this context, we're also having some challenges in exactly how to deal with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And those of you engaged with the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator will know that we remain with an extremely unequal response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of challenges in making sure that all the tools we have available are available for people in all countries in the world. And what we are doing is basically trying to focus everybody's mind on the fact that both the ongoing COVID crisis and the lack of security, and particularly lack of food security, all create a perfect environment for ongoing real challenges in the fight against AIDS, TB, and malaria. And the fact that we can kind of very easily get off track even further on the goals that we had for both saving lives and really finishing the 3 diseases as epidemics by 2030. Next slide, please. So we continue to make those arguments, and we continue to push for the fact that the unfinished business in global health, and in particular the unfinished pandemics of AIDS, TB, and malaria, need to be high up on the international agenda. And that as we think about what new global health architecture looks like, we double down on the architecture that works, right? And the fact that the Global Fund has 20 years of experience in dealing with pandemics and in creating impact out of investments that donors have been generous enough to give over the last 20 years. So that is the positioning that we're going for. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we've been incredibly busy reaching out, as have all of you. You all familiar with the machinery that comes into being during a replenishment year for the Global Fund. We have to get all of those G7 and OECD DAC donors to increase their contributions by 30%. That's the only way we get to 18 billion, is to make sure that all donors increase and that the vast majority of donors increase by the full 30%. Every donor that doesn't increase that much is creating a gap that either new donors or new partners need to fill. So we need to mobilize all the aspects of our machinery to really make that happen. Next slide, please. So, so far so good, I would say. A lot of our outreach, and I've actually lost track of how many countries we've been in so far this year, but I think we're upwards of 12 or 15 countries. And the response to the investment case has been very positive. I think this speaks volumes to the work that you have all done over the years in advocating for the Global Fund and for the fight against AIDS, TB, and malaria, because the donors are very understanding of the way in which we position our replenishment, of the solidity of the investment case, and the lives that we're going to save. So all of that has landed very well. That has not been a challenge in convincing donors of what the Global Fund can do with the money. Next slide, please. But the other piece that we're finding is a real opportunity is the US leadership and the fact that they have been very active in the hosting duties, as we could say. Not only did they put the first FY23 amount on the table, the president's budget request of 2 billion for the Global Fund gave a very good indication of the increase they were going to, but they have explicitly said in the budget request that this is an intended pledge of 6 billion. That means that the US is coming in with their share of the 18 billion, putting a third of that amount on the table. And the argument that any donor who doesn't increase by 30% is leaving US money on the table is turning out to be a very powerful argument. So I strongly suggest that all of your advocacy does include this piece, that the US has stepped up, and by US legislation, they can only contribute the full 6 billion if other donors come up with the additional 12 billion. So we absolutely have to get all of that money in. Next slide, please. These are all of the different elements that we use in the replenishment campaign. As I said, we are out there on the road right now, going directly to capitals, asking them for money, mobilizing parliamentarians and so on. We are in constant contact, and by this I mean constant contact with the US government, who are reaching out to all of the other donors, making phone calls, speaking to people at the highest levels of government to make sure that they're aware of what the ask is. We've mobilized all of our champions and influencers. Thanks very much to all of you. I know there's a lot of work being done in many of the implementing countries for those heads of state and for civil society and advocates in those implementing countries to get the message out. That we really expect and need the world to come up with 18 billion so that we can achieve the lives saved that we need to, and really get those mortality rates under 1 million, which for the first time in history, which would be absolutely incredible achievement. So we're using all of those tools as well as media tools, social media tools, and in fact, we'll be ramping up our campaign in the next few months. I'll get to that in a moment. So we really look to you for your support. Next slide, please. Here are some of the themes that we're finding we need to talk about. I mentioned already, of course, that the terrible war in Ukraine and the situation in many challenging operating environments. Remember, there is still ongoing challenges and threats in places like Myanmar. There is a lot of climate-related disasters in Southern Africa right now. There are ongoing war situations in several parts of the world. So a lot of that is part of the conversation we have to have with donors. But the themes that we get asked about the most frequently are really on strengthening health systems, including strengthening community systems and community health worker networks. We talk about that a lot, but also pandemic preparedness and response more long term. And then, of course, for our inner circle of donors, the strategy implementation is really important. They want to understand how that is going to deliver the results they want to see out of the Global Fund strategy for the next 6 years. Next slide, please. This, if you just, yes, thanks, Katie. If you click through the different circles, this gives you a sense of how we're doing in the different diversification of our donors. Oops, sorry. I don't need to say a lot about that. You can all go back and look at the slide. But the key points to recognize are what I've already mentioned, that we can't get to 18 billion unless the vast majority of the G7 increase, and if most of them increase by 30%. There's just too much money on the table for us to ignore the G7 as the primary target for getting to 18 billion. But we're now pivoting a little bit to our mid-range donors, because not only are they very important for reaching the overall target, but there are many mid-range donors who could do more than 30% increase. And so we're focusing in on those donors who could come in with either doubling or increasing by 50 or 80%. So there's a lot of focus on getting those donors up, and also our new donors and the non-OECD DAC donors, making sure that they come in with significantly higher contributions this time. So this is sort of how we're planning and arranging and prioritization of our work. Next slide, please. We also, I'm sure, have, oops, just the timeline. Thanks, Katie. We're all focused on these upcoming events, and we have a lot of opportunity in the next couple of weeks and I hesitate to say months because it's really weeks. In this upcoming weeks, we really have to focus on some of the key moments for advocacy. The one that's coming up really fast that is really key is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. In amongst our G7 donors, the one that's at the highest risk right now is probably the UK of not increasing. And we really need to focus our advocacy on the Commonwealth countries, particularly the UK, who will be in Kigali, but Canada and Australia will also be there. And it's a great opportunity for advocates to get those heads of state and your own voices in front of the UK government and the other Commonwealth governments to say you expect the 8 billion. We also have the G7 summit coming up. We already have language in the development ministers outcome, which is really fantastic, very strong language. Very much thanks to advocacy by everybody here, but also the leadership of the US government in getting that language in. We need to make sure that it still remains on the agenda of what is a very busy G7. And then we have what is always, sorry, there's a lot of noise on the, thank you. We always have an opportunity at the AIDS conference to really raise our voices, and we're going to count on you to do that at this IAS conference. Obviously, one of the key targets at the IAS will be Canada, but there will be many other donors present there too, and we would really ask for a big push on Global Fund funding at that event. We have other events coming up in August related to private sector outreach and other activities, all culminating in what we expect will be a pledging conference around the UN General Assembly in New York in September. Next slide, please. So I think this possibly takes us into some of the campaign moments. I won't spend too much time on this. It's a bit historical, but there's a lot of things going on. Davos, the World Health Assembly, the Biden Summit, the board meeting, all of which were very helpful in raising our voice and making noise. But now we need to get into serious campaigning and lifting the voice of communities. Next slide, please. This takes us into I've talked through some of these, so I won't spend time, Katie. So the CHOGM, I spoke about the heads of the government and the need to outreach there. The G7 summit I mentioned, and I think the next one is IAS. Yes. So we've been through all of that. You guys can read these slides afterwards just to see what all is going on and how you can help. Let's move on into the campaign slides, Katie, that are towards the end. So just a reminder to everybody that there are a lot of campaign assets. There's the investment case in multiple languages. There is our Fight for What Counts film, which you can absolutely show at your events. We hope that you find it very inspiring. There are also lots of stories on our websites from our communities that you can use the assets from in any events that you might be planning. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of flipboards, messages where you can hand them out at meetings, take photos, you can fill in the message boards about what you want to fight for, what you want the Global Fund to fight for. There's a digital photo booth that you can encourage people to use in your networks and make sure that all of your voices are added. Next slide, please. To what is our 1,000 Voices campaign, collecting, and Katie, I'm sure you'll talk about this when you talk about the GFAN meeting, collecting stories, advocacy demands, and testimonials from people doing this. There are visibility items available, social media tiles, lots of things that you can print out and use. And I think there might be one more slide in this, which explains, yes, how you can engage, what to do at your events, and how to participate in our call to action for the 1,000 voices. Next slide, please. There, that's it. It was a bit of a rush through, Katie, but I didn't want to take too much time, because I think it's much more fun if we have a discussion, and I'm more than happy to take questions and dive deeper into any of the issues or questions people might have. So thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Diane. We will make these slides available on our website, along with a recording of this video for anybody who wants to go back to it, or if you have colleagues who weren't able to join us today. So I would invite you, if you have any questions or comments based on Diane's presentation, to please use the raise hand function, which you should be able to find either through participants or reactions, usually, to use the raise hand, or just note in the chat that you have a question that you'd like to raise, and I will get to you. Are there any questions or comments from this? Don't be shy, my friends. Maybe just to get us started, Diane, because I think folks are having, I see one question raised, but maybe just to get us started, could you go back a little bit to the CHOGM, which is taking place in a couple of weeks, in a couple of weeks. And just to say for colleagues that this was a topic of great conversation last week when we were all together or joining virtually to the GFAN meeting, and we can come back to that later. But just to say that there's an awful lot of activities that are currently being planned to make sure that we take advantage of that in the context of the UK. And I think it would be helpful to hear, I don't know if Diane or other colleagues who are online from the UK may want to jump in a little bit and explain a little bit about why the context in the UK is so challenging at the moment, because I think there's a lot of sort of detail around what's happening. And I don't want to put James like on the spot, but I think it might be helpful to hear from UK colleague about sort of some of the various dynamics and why it's going to be so critical as you start to see things coming out over the next few days. There's going to be sign-on letters, there's a day of action planned on the 16th, and why we're going to be asking all of you to participate in that and support that. So James, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, if it's okay if I could ask you to come in here, and then Diane, if you have anything further to add on the UK context, that would be helpful. But James?
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks a lot for the presentation, Diane, as well. So I'm James from Stockade, for those who don't know me, and yeah, we are dealing with a very challenging situation right now in the UK, as we've spoken about in previous meetings. We know from the start it's going to be a difficult replenishment campaign for the UK, as of course the UK government has cut their development assistance budget down from 0.7 GNI to a 0.5% GNI last year. And more recently, a few weeks ago, and we saw finally the publication of the UK's International Development Strategy, which unfortunately signals a cut in funding to multilaterals, down from around 40%, now just down to a quarter. And also the government from the UK right now also wants to find, in their words, a proportionate burden share for their contribution compared to other donors. And of course, with the UK being the second largest donor for the fund's last replenishment in 2019, this makes it even more challenging to get the increase that we desperately need from the UK when they're viewing it largely through that lens. But for those who weren't at the GFAN meeting last week, we had some really great discussions on what more we can do to pile pressure on the UK to hopefully give as much funding as they desperately need to give to the Global Fund as well. And we really welcome everyone's support and doing so much for the UK over the past few months, down from UK's civil society organisations to global GFAN members, and of course the Secretariat as well too. But one of the key things that came out from the meeting, given the intel that we've been hearing right now, that the UK is considering cutting their funding to the UK government, to global funds, and the intel suggesting that the decision is likely to be made within the next few weeks even, was looking to how much we can mobilise around CHOGM in a couple of weeks' time. So we have plans for a UK-focused day of action next Thursday, so Thursday the 16th of June. And in the next hour or so after this meeting, you'll be hearing from Katie and myself asking for those based in Commonwealth countries to please sign on to an open letter to the UK government that we hope to be published on the 16th. And if colleagues will be interested in mobilising more with us, either trying to have a hand in or a meeting with the UK in your respective country, or looking to support us with our social media activation and a Twitter storm, more information of that will be shared within the next day or so as well too. But as Diane was saying, looking at the projections and the current UK's funding and other G7 members as well, we really can't let the UK off the hook right now. Also, CHOGM is really important, as will be the G7 in a few weeks' time as well too. And we're looking to assess the situation over the next few weeks and days to see what more we can do and whether we need to ramp up even further as well too. But we had a great event that UK colleagues organised with parliamentarians yesterday. I'm really pleased to be joined by Peter, who made a brilliant intervention for the need of the UK to show continued leadership. And we're looking to build on this with engagement with parliamentarians and other key stakeholders going forward. So thank you for the funds, for having that brilliant support from Peter for last night's reception and everything. Let to go and more to do. Happy to take any questions in the UK as well.
James, I think that's really helpful. And Diane, did you have anything that you wanted to add in before we go to the questions that we do have?
Just briefly, thanks, James. I think you laid it out really well. Just to add that we're also reaching out to a number of heads of state from sub-Saharan African countries, sometimes with the help of some of our GFAN supporters, just to make sure that the message also goes from government to government. So not only from the US, but also from our champions in Africa, to say that it's really important that the US continues their global commitment and leadership in global health. We know it's quite, not only is the budget shrinking, but they also have concerns around them playing more than their fair share to the global fund. So we have to sort of combine pressure to do the right thing and to not walk away from commitments with praise for their leading role in global health, and just kind of trying to really make sure that the message is clearly received, that this would not be tenable for them not to step up for this replenishment. So yeah, I think the messaging, as James said, very difficult environment, but the messaging needs to be both, our positive praise, but also a little bit of a pressure as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I think finding the right balance in terms of that positive praise and pressure, and kind of throwing, it's a terrible Canadian political reference, but throwing jello at the wall to see what sticks is where we're at with the UK, and hoping that, we get the collaborations from, Commonwealth countries here, colleagues in Commonwealth countries over the next few weeks here, and continue to build that pressure as, colleagues in the UK identify for us, when these critical moments are. So I'm still seeing one hand raised, and I would invite people, if they do have questions for Diane based on the presentation, to please raise your hand or let us know in the chat. But Musa, you've been waiting with your hand raised for a long time. So over to you for your question or comment.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thanks to Diana for that very, very lucid presentation. I think the presentation is very clear, and it speaks very well to current happenings and upcoming events around the world, which we must all take as opportunities for engagement. My concern basically is for us in the global south, civil societies in the global south, how, for example, we seize opportunities like this to rally around our government, for example, attending the Commonwealth Heads of State Summit in Rwanda coming up, and other spaces that we may have, and what it will all mean to increasing resource mobilization at the global level. So we are still very much critical to opening to more understanding as to where we stand as a global South civil society or Southern civil society in all of this, and how we could all join our Western civil society players in moving forward. Over to you, Katie. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Lisa. Diane, did you want to jump in with any quick thoughts?
Well, just to support that sentiment very much, I think it would be, I think the leadership from the CSOs in implementing countries has been incredible and really made a difference for the last replenishment. And I think the messaging around why it's so important to get this money and what can be done with it, and the incredible achievements to date that we don't want to lose sight of. All of those things are really, really important. So getting those messages in front, and from what I understand, and James made reference to the event last night in the UK, Maureen Marenga was there. It's only yesterday, so I haven't seen all of the outcomes, but I heard in real time that she was doing an incredible job speaking to the BBC and a lot of media outlets, and then to the MPs last night, making exactly that case, what can be achieved, what it really means when we talk about lives saved, and what the opportunity is over the next few years. So I would just say we just need more and more and more of that in relation to all of the donors. The only donor that has announced unequivocally is Luxembourg at 30%. So there's everything to play for. Like, every single donor needs some attention. Thanks.
And I would just say as well, thank you, Diane, for that. And I would just say, and I'll pop my email into the chat, but Musa, we have GFAN regional partners in both the African region, Francophone and Anglophone leads, as well as Asia Pacific as a region. And those regional partners really take the leadership in terms of organizing those kinds of events and activities and actions in, I call implementing countries in the Global Fund context. So that if you're not already linked up to them, it would be ideal for you to get linked up with them, and I can do that for you. Although GFAN Asia Pacific has a very good website if you Google for them, but I will pop my email into the link there. And so for colleagues who are joining us from the Global South, just to say that we do have very active, very strong regional partners who are really leading on some of these efforts from the Global South around CHOGM, around the African Union, around different events like TCAD that are taking place under the leadership of Japan, which is really relevant in the Asia Pacific context, and so on. So I'll pop my email in there and just see if we can connect any of you with those groups. Are there any other questions or comments from those on the line for Diane? If you're having trouble finding the raise hand, please just unmute your line. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, Diane, so I think it means that despite all of your time spent in planes, trains, and automobiles, you're getting expert at that presentation, which there has been a question in the chat. And just for those who have joined late, we will be putting the presentation up as well as a recording of this call in full up on our website in the next day or two. Bear with me because I'm by myself this week and I'm not usually the technical side of things for calls or websites. So I will get it up there as soon as I can. But thank you so much, Diane, for joining us en route to wherever you are. And just really appreciate your comments today, as well as joining us last week. And I think we've got our work ahead of us over the next few weeks in particular, and over the next few months. But we'll be looking forward to updates from you. We've already tagged a few times over the next few months where we'll have the Secretariat joining us for these kinds of updates so that we can all stay up to date and informed about what's going on. So thank you very much, Diane. Appreciate it. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put my presentation back up. Honestly, you guys, this is why nobody should ever leave me in charge of the technical side of things. But Here we go. So I just wanted to give you all a quick, oh my gosh, it actually worked. Look at that. I just wanted to give you a quick update from our GFAN meeting that took place last week in Berlin, which was the first time since March of 2020 that we were able to hold an in-person meeting as GFAN. It was also a hybrid meeting. You can see in one of those pictures the setup that we had with a screen up at the front and our our colleagues joining us virtually, who were able to join us in the room, and an awful picture of Conte and I as we got underway, but nonetheless, it was a great week where we spent essentially 3 full days together. And the main focus of the meeting was, essentially what Diane has just walked us through in terms of identifying pathways to 18 billion through advocacy in donor and implementing countries. And I think you're going to hear, you've heard a little bit about the UK, which was a hot topic in terms of, what we could do to support each other. And another one of the hot topics that came up throughout the week was the World Bank and the Financial Intermediary Fund white paper, which many groups have shared input that they submitted, and that was due sort of in the middle of our week together. So I think it was a hot topic because it was coming up. And for those of you who don't know what the World Bank Financial Intermediary Fund or fifth white paper is, it's the conversation around what comes next in the global health architecture in terms of pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And so there's a lot of things in the white paper, which was meant to sort of set out some initial ideas about what that should look like. And there was a lot of challenges in terms of governance, civil society, and community engagement, it being truly global and led by all countries and not just some countries. As well as the fact that the Global Fund and a number of other multilateral and other actors who have been, leading within the COVID response over the last 2 years would not be eligible to be initial recipients of funding and implementing partners through this financial intermediary fund. So a lot of input focused on those areas, and we're building, and again, bear with me, but we're building a website page where we're trying to pull together all of those different inputs from colleagues in civil society globally who did put something into that, and a short briefing for all of you about what the fifth is and why it matters in the context of the Global Fund. And while replenishment is obviously the main focus of the work that we are doing, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to this because the timelines are quite compressed. And if we don't pay attention to this alongside the replenishment, we could find ourselves with something that is really difficult for us to support. And just to say that Jeff has just popped into the chat that we will have a summary of these discussions in the meeting report that Jeff is leading on as our rapporteur from the meeting, that should be available in the next week or so on our website, and we'll make sure you all have that. We also had a great virtual session on the Ukraine, which welcomed a number of Ukraine colleagues to the discussion virtually, as well as German civil society colleagues. So we had quite an interesting discussion and heard about the ways in which the Global Fund has been working in the Ukraine and supporting those colleagues who are working on HIV and TB in the Ukraine to continue to provide service through the war with Russia. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but I will find it and make sure it's a part of the resources from this call. But colleagues from Results in the UK had published a report around Ukraine and the Global Fund and the Global Fund's work in challenging operating environments more broadly. And they had produced one that had kind of a UK set of messaging, and then also had more recently produced one with sort of an international kind of messaging, so it's less UK specific. And I'll make sure that you have a link to that, unless we have a Results UK colleague on the line who can dig that link up now in the chat. I'll make sure that it's there on the webpage as a sort of response. So we spent a lot of time in a meeting room talking to each other and hearing from each other. But we also, for the first time in quite a long time, we spent time outside of the meeting and supporting our German civil society colleagues in their activities and their efforts to make sure that they get Germany to at least the 1.3 billion level, which would be a 30% increase from their 6th replenishment pledge. And so we did have a high-level meeting where the US ambassador to Germany welcomed everyone and provided sort of the context as the host of the pledging meeting later this year. As well as we were joined by the ambassador to Germany from Rwanda, who shared a lot of statistics about the Global Fund's work in Rwanda, and then really got personal about what some of the reasons why he was engaged and interested in the work around the Global Fund and in HIV in particular. We also went to the Chancellery, to Chancellor Scholz's office and residence, although I'm not sure that he's actually in residence there. And we had an old-fashioned, as Peter Wiesner, our colleague from Action Against AIDS in Germany called it, an old-fashioned die-in, where we also, recorded some videos and sent them with the letter that all of you had been asked to sign onto, where we had over 160 signatories globally, and delivered that letter. So overall, it was quite a busy week, and Claire has lovely put that Ukraine report in the chat for all of us. So thank you so much for that, Claire. And so just to say that it was a lovely time to be able to connect with some people in person and have people of it joining us virtually. And we hope that we did a good job of that hybrid version. I think it did work fairly well. Luckily, we never lost the internet for our colleagues who were joining us virtually. And a lot of great ideas came out of the meeting, most of it meaning work for all of us over the next few weeks, but you'll be hearing from us regularly about actions that you can take. There's already a request and a civil society letter that's looking for global signatories that's on our website, which is directed to the Danish Minister of International Cooperation, which is intended to be handed off during a visit that they have later this month in Uganda. And so asking everyone to please take a moment, and if you can, click on that link, sign on as your organization, and please share this as broadly as you can with other networks, listservs, other networks that are maybe interested, as it's really critical that we get some global support for our colleagues in Denmark and in some of the other Nordic countries. So I think I've talked enough about what the meeting was, and I hope that we've made clear that there's a number of things like this Danish letter that are going to be coming up, the UK letter, where we're going to be looking for people to add their support. I think it's probably the first replenishment that I've worked where the need for global colleagues to be supporting the actions and activities of those in key donor countries, as well as some key implementing countries, is really high. So just really asking you to keep on top of that and consider supporting these actions that have been identified by those colleagues in country as being really critical to the success of their advocacy for the replenishment. So it's an interesting dynamic, and we had an interesting meeting last week, and just hoping that that this is interesting to all of you. One of the things that I didn't mention, actually, one of the other side activities that we had was we were joined by Global Fund colleagues who are working on the communication side, and were able to record, I think, over 30 participants for part of 1,000 voices to add to the video sort of log that the Global Fund Secretariat has. And you'll start to see some of that roll out over the next few months. So that was also an exciting opportunity to welcome Secretariat colleagues and be able to contribute to that. So just taking a pause there to see if there's any questions or comments. And yes, Christy said over 30 people recorded, which is great. Any questions or comments, or other colleagues who were at the meetings last week who wanted to share any key reflections? I note that Peter has popped in a link around the Ukraine session, so you can see the video of that discussion on the Ukraine that was held during the GFAN meetings and hosted, as I said, by our German civil society colleagues. Any other comments? Quiet bunch today. Okay. Thank you, Sophie. It was really lovely to be able to see people in person and to be able to get back to sort of what we do, which is, figuring out ways we can support each other and collaborate on our advocacy. Seeing no other questions, I would just invite you to raise your hand if there is an announcement or an upcoming sort of activity that you would be looking for colleagues' support on. This is a moment to use the last 10 minutes or so of the call to share any announcements or information that you might like to share. So if you do have an announcement that you'd like to make, if you could raise your hand or pop into the chat that you'd like to speak. I'm beginning to wonder if anybody can hear me. No, I know you're all there, but it is a very quiet bunch. So Peter, I see your hand raised, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, we can all hear you. So I just wanted to say thanks to you again for being in Berlin with us. This was extremely helpful. We are currently sort of putting together the video, so it will be about 3 minutes long, and we are going to share it with you. And Katie, there will be an extra video related to the letter that was signed. So this will be with your statement, and I'm going to share it with you. And I think with this materials, because we are going to discuss and to explain why die-ins are not old-fashioned, as I put it. And I think all together it sends a really strong message together with the pictures. So we are going to share this with you next week, and please circulate it then. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Peter. I'm just saying again that the PowerPoint, as I've said before, the PowerPoint and the recording from this call will be available on our website in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours. We put them up there, as well as other resources that have been shared during the call, as we always do. So if you haven't noticed that before on our website, bookmark that page, that link that I've just put there, so that you can check back in and see, calls from past weeks and months. And thank you, Peter, for those comments. I think from my perspective, it's the first time in a long time that we've done sort of an effort to sort of support advocacy in country while we meet. And I think that's a really interesting model for us to think about, particularly in replenishment years. When we do have a GFAN meeting, we might as well take advantage of getting the number of people that we can get together to use it to its full advantage in a replenishment year. Guillermina, I see your hand raised as well. Can I pass it to you?
Thank you. Good morning, good evening to everyone. First of all, congratulations on the Berlin activity. It went great. We had some people there supporting each other. And I just wanted to share that for the Commonwealth Heads of States meeting, we're doing some advocacy work. We're sending letters to the embassies, targeting the richest countries, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand specifically, but we're also sending letters to the leaders of all the AHF countries that are part of the Commonwealth, asking them to be our voice at the meeting and for the 7th replenishment and the expansion of the mandate. So we're also going to engage with a Twitter rally. I will share the information a bit closer to the meeting that last week. So anyone who can join is welcome, and we will also support any other activity or initiative that we're having. We've been endorsing the letters, and please count on us and on all of our 45 countries that are going to work on this too. So thank you very much for coordinating all this.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. We'll stay tuned for that. Just noting that Kelly Willis has put in her email address for any of you who are going to be in Katgali for the Summit on Malaria and NTDs to contact them around an event that's taking place there that you may be interested in joining. So thank you for that, Kelly. Any other comments, announcements, things that colleagues would like to raise as coming up? Shortly, you could unmute if you're having trouble finding the raise hand function. No. Okay. Well, otherwise, unbelievably, no, actually not unbelievably, but compared to last week's meeting, we are ending on time. Although I will say we ended the meeting at exactly precisely the minute that we said that the meeting would be over. But we did have some difficulty because of the richness of the discussions staying on time throughout the week. But we managed to fit it all in thanks to all of you. And we will share that meeting report that will be available. I'm just seeing a hand raised from Onya from MSF. So maybe pass it over to you really quickly, and then we'll let folks go.
Yeah, sorry, Kathy, I should just mention that MSF is looking at writing a briefing document based on what we're seeing in the field, a type of gaps analysis on what is missing. We're hoping to have that available for the AIDS conference in Montreal, but genuinely the target, if you like, is the replenishment, and to be able to use it to lobby the donors, and also to lobby in country, to have our staff in country also lobby embassies and things to try and really rally some support for the replenishment. Even though the document in itself won't be written saying fund the fund, the intention is exactly that, to demonstrate the gaps and the problems that already exist, and how much worse and the aggravation that would be caused if at least the 18 billion is not raised. So just for that information, but when we have it, of course, we'll share it. Thank you.
That's great. And maybe we can invite you to share with one of our future GFAN calls, sort of a 10-minute session, and just give us the highlights from the paper so that we can hear from you how it's most relevant in the Global Fund context, given that it will be presented in a non-replenishment context, but is meant to be used in all of our advocacy efforts. So we'll come back to you and check in with you around timing of that to see if that's possible before the IAS, to get a bit of a briefing from you on that, and colleagues. Any other announcements before I let you all go? Okay. Well, listen, I hope that you all have a great rest of your day. Apologies for some of the technical issues today. I usually have my team who supports and makes everything tickety-boo from the background, but they are taking a well-deserved rest this week after last week's meeting. And so thank you for bearing with me. Thank you again to Diane and colleagues from the Global Fund Secretariat who support Diane to be here today and share that overview. And again, we will pop that up onto the website as soon as I figure out how to use the website. But thank you for joining today, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your days. So thank you, and we'll be in touch. Keep an eye on the GFAN listserv, lots coming up. Take care, everyone.
On